Chapter 6. Okay. So here we go. Limud zchus. Okay. So here we're going to talk about seeking merits, not mistakes. And again, this is going to impact our relationship with people. I can't remember how we were having a conversation. Oh yeah, we were also having a conversation earlier, and my husband right away turned around the conversation to find merit in a situation.
Hold on a second. You haven't needs how to get in.
Yaeltrusch.com /
Okay.
Okay, so chapter 6, seek merits, not mistakes. So it's interesting. We're going to talk about the sixth Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak of Lubavitch, who's released from prison. We celebrated just yesterday. So here we go. Towards the end of the life of Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak of the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, he gathered together some of his oldest and most trusted Hasidim and said to them, we're looking for someone who will seek out the merits of the Jewish people and advocate on their behalf. Okay? It was only after the Rebbe accepted the mantle of Chabad leadership that they fully understood the full scope and the significance of that simple statement. It was only later that the Hasidim understood what the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe had meant by saying that they're looking for someone who will seek out the merits of the Jewish people and really advocate on their behalf. From his first public address, it became clear that the Rebbe sought to make Ahavas Israel, the unconditional love and acceptance of one's fellow, the cornerstone of his unceasing effort to heal and revitalize the Jewish people in the aftermath of the horrors of the Holocaust. Right, and we see this is the hallmark of Chabad, like this Ahavas Israel, like we talked about the other day. We see it since I was actually having a conversation. We were doing some sort of exercise at a JLI leadership summit, and I was in the table, my husband, and I'm forgetting his name, from Miami, and there was George Rohr, and there was like a few really nice people. And I remember Mr. Rohr was saying, this Ahavas Israel is like, in Lubavitch, the kids, it's in their mother's milk, he said. And I'm not saying this just anecdotally, like I'm saying because I've seen it, right, over the years working with Chabad. It's just the way the Rebbe taught us to look at the world, to look at life, to look at other Yidden, and approach it from a perspective of Ahavas Israel, like Sherry was saying yesterday, like what is the mitzvah I'm doing when I'm just doing these random things like helping you cook for Shabbos, or running to bring somebody, somebody needs a set of bedding or towel or whatever. So we said, okay, so it's chesed, it's gemilas chasadim, and like the other rabbi who answered your question said, it's chesed, and it's also Ahavas Israel, right? You're just unconditionally showing up for another person who needs something, right? And other people might see it as an inconvenience, right? And we don't look at it like that. We look at, what does the person need, right? Do they need chicken soup right now? Do you need an encouraging word? Do they need to come over? Do they need, that's expressing our love for another person, okay? Okay, so now continuing on, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak saw the need for, and the Rebbe set into motion, a radical new approach to uplift and activate the Jewish people, emphasizing joy over judgment, right? Somebody was saying, like, in Chabad, usually we don't tend to be judgmental. Like, that's not our approach, right? It doesn't matter like how you're dressing, what you're doing, what you're not doing. Like, we're not looking for that, because again, this whole approach that we're learning in this book is we're looking at the essence, like we're looking at the soul level. So the externalities are really inconsequential, because at the end of the day, we're all, like we discussed in the previous chapters, we're exactly the same. Just because somebody is wearing a sheitel or somebody is wearing a black hat doesn't make them superior to another Yid, and nothing to do with each other. Again, this is not about a level of knowledge, right, or level of observance. It's everybody is exactly the same, because each and every person is a chelek Elokah. So when you have that approach, right, what are you judging? There's nothing to judge. The only one who judges is Hashem. You can only judge yourself, not anybody else. So anyway, so what's the approach that the sixth Rebbe was looking for? He was looking for an approach that emphasizes joy over judgment, compassion over condemnation, and empowerment over exclusion. Toward this end, the Rebbe, the seventh Rebbe, set out to accomplish nothing less than a full-scale revolution of Jewish values by utilizing the foundations of the Hasidic movement, which sought to illuminate and activate the inner soul of the Jewish people. And again, we're talking about the foundations of the Hasidic movement, as we talked about last week, right? When we were comparing what the work that the Baal Shem Tov came and did, right? Who also infused this joy of being Jewish, this idea that you are just as worthy, your prayers with not even knowing an alphabet is just as worthy, if not more, than the prayers of the Talmud Chacham who knows the entire Shas, right? So, and we discussed this last week. That was the approach of the Baal Shem Tov. And now we're seeing that the Rebbe came and he took this, right? And based on these foundations of Hasidus, he took a world after the Holocaust, a Jewish world that was downtrodden, right? And again, revitalized, illuminated, and activated the inner soul of the people by letting them know, again, who they really are. Just like Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs said, just like the Nazis hunted them in hate, the Rebbe searched for them in love, right? We looked out for every Jew in love, with the Ahavas Israel, right? That became the cornerstone of the entire Chabad movement. A deep belief in the indomitable presence of a redemptive spark within each individual. Let the Rebbe, oh, my mic is not plugged, doesn't matter. Let the Rebbe to constantly strive to acknowledge and amplify whatever point of goodness a person might possess, right? And there always is one. By the way, there always is one, right? It's again what we choose to focus on. This is referred to as limud chus, finding merits in others. In addition to judging others favorably, as the Mishnah demands, limud chus literally means the study of another's merit, which implies, and this is key, a conscious, concerted, and creative effort to discover the often hidden merits in others and bring them to the fore. And any one of us who has interpersonal relations, right? Friends, neighbors, in-laws, sisters, siblings, brothers-in-law, whatever it is, we all know, right? Community members, work colleagues, we all know that very often it really, if we want to find the good, we actually have to make a very, as it says here, very conscious, concerted, and creative. We have to really go through the process of finding, and that's exactly what we need to do. That's the Rebbe's approach, okay? That because sometimes it's just hidden to us. It wouldn't come naturally for us to notice a good quality in that individual. But when we make a conscious effort to see their situation, perhaps from another angle, and look at it, we suddenly we get creative. We say, but they're actually an amazing parent by doing this and this and that, right? It's not maybe the way I would do it, but it's coming from such a great place. Look how meticulous they are in their parenting, whatever it might be, right? Okay. As we will see from the examples below, a hallmark of the Rebbe's positivity bias was his stubborn insistence on always seeking and highlighting the good in others. In this way, he took his place in the illustrious line of great Jewish leaders who sought to uplift and unify the people, right? Just like the Baal Shem Tov, as we mentioned last week. Okay, remember the 10%. Let's see what this is about. A certain vice president of a prominent college was known for generously volunteering his time on behalf of Jewish education, which was one of the Rebbe's deepest concerns, right? We all know, Chabad is very involved in Jewish education, and this is such an important cause, right? We need to make sure that every child has a proper Jewish education, right? So specifically, this person that was president of a college used his experience with the local bureaucracy to assist Jewish institutions by preparing the necessary applications for state and federal funding. Over the years, he received much satisfaction from seeing numerous schools and institutions awarded necessary funding on account of his efforts. However, at some point, he began noticing a marked drop in his success rate. After looking into matters, he discovered that his applications had not even reached the federal offices, so something was going on. In fact, they were regularly being flagged and disqualified by a Jewish state clerk who deliberately sought petty flaws in every application. He didn't want this guy to get away with getting funding. On one Sunday afternoon, while receiving $1 from the Rebbe for charity, he briefly described the situation. So imagine, he was very frustrated. He's doing this to really volunteer to help the Jewish institutions get funding. And he sees that this is the other Jewish person is really looking for ways that the paperwork shouldn't, move up the ladder. So he describes the situation to the Rebbe. Let's see what happens. In fact, he became so agitated in the course of his retelling that he blurted out, in the past, when a person stood in the way of benefiting the Jewish people, our leaders would intervene on high to make sure they could interfere no longer. This is what I'm asking regarding that clerk. So he was very strong. He was a little chutzpah, if you will, like telling the Rebbe what to do. I'm telling you, be like the tzaddikim of the olden day. Like, I need you to intercede so that this guy doesn't continue to stop this paperwork from going through. The Rebbe listened patiently and then responded. Even if one considers another person to be 90% lacking in goodness and merit, listen to this, guys, this is crazy. One must nevertheless remember that he still maintains 10% of positive virtue. Here, the Rebbe defends a seemingly indefensible individual by claiming that no matter how bad he seems, there is surely a portion of him that is righteous, and it is that innermost reality, his true essence, that we should focus on, connect with, and strive to reveal and activate. One particular area in which the Rebbe consistently refused to judge other Jews harshly because he would focus on their essence was in relation to their personal level of ritual observance. So as I mentioned before, right? Like, that wasn't something that the Rebbe focused on. This willingness to publicly defend those Jews who, for whatever reason, had strayed from the fold of Jewish law set the Rebbe apart from much of the prevailing religious leadership and establishment. As we know from all the Mipsa campaigns, like every time the Rebbe came up with a Mipsa campaign, there was tremendous opposition. Like, how are you going to put tefillin on these people who were eating who knows what before? Like, there was so much opposition. Like, it wasn't the norm. But the Rebbe set the standard, because nowadays we see, Baruch Hashem, we live in a world that is, again, the Rebbe set the stage for these times that are so messianic, where there's so much achdus with where every I don't only like interact with Chabad, I also write for Aish. I have like a close relationship with Jamie Geller, with Aish, and they do wonderful work, right? And it's really everybody's working for the same cause and in the same modality, in the same way of looking with Ahavas Israel and being non-judgmental, looking at the essence, going with a loving approach, right? Right? This is really, we have to give credit where credit is due. This is really all credit to the vision, the foresight, and the work of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Thankfully, despite the enormous opposition he faced over the years, today there is hardly a segment within the Orthodox Jewish community that has not adopted, to some extent or another, the embracing and non-judgmental attitude he embodied and advocated, transforming inclusivity into the norm. And that is the truth. Now we live in a world where Jewishly inclusivity is the norm. In earlier generation, my father-in-law, in the earlier generation, I hear stories from my father-in-law when he was younger. He wanted to become a rabbi. He wanted to actually become an Orthodox rabbi. And unfortunately, at that time, and he wasn't raised in an observant home, and he didn't have a lot of means, and he came from a very humble background, and he was judged very harshly, like to the extreme that actually they didn't take him in the rabbinical school because he wasn't wearing a tie, like something so silly, right? Like you hear these stories of like the olden days, like these things wouldn't even fly today, like, you know what I mean? Like, who cares if you put on tefillin this morning? You know what? Let's put it on now. Like, let's do it. You know what I mean? I was just at the mall with a friend, and we're like talking to one of the Israelis that, he was selling me a cream and the thing, whatever. And I was like, oh man, like, we should have brought tefillin. Not that women should be, but obviously I was going to do, shame I'm not with my husband. We have tefillin for this kid. But anyway, I told him when he was trying to sell me the cream, I said, I got to teach a class. He said, what is your class about? And I said, bitachon. He says, what? I said, yeah, that's what we all need, bitachon. He was so happy. So that was it. Maybe that was all he needed. He needed a reminder that he needs to have bitachon. Okay. So anyways, the next few stories testify to these special qualities embodied and espoused by the Rebbe. Okay, so here we go. The Rebbe once received a letter from a businessman who, in the course of his travels, had encountered something that upset him. Specifically, he was perturbed by a man in a far-flung community who would come to shul to make the minyan, but then proceed to read his newspaper throughout the prayers. So this man writes to the Rebbe. He's very upset that he lives in this community and there is this individual who goes and helps with the minyan, but chutzpah, he comes, and while we're all praying, yeah, he's there, he's making the minyan, but he takes out the New York Times. Like it feels very, right? So he's saying, so now let's see what the Rebbe is going to say. This blatant display of disrespect was simply more than the businessman could bear, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. In complaint, the Rebbe responded, everyone, of course, reacts to an experience in a way that is closest to him. Ouch. Meaning to say, you see what you want to see, like your perception is according to like how your lens, if your lens is refined in a certain way, you're going to find certain things. But like we said before, if your lens is sensitive to certain things, that's where you're going to go to, right? Thus, for my part, I make the following observations, because again, the Rebbe had that positivity bias. First, I see in this situation the degree of Jewish attachment that one finds in every Jew, right? The Rebbe's initial perception about this situation is, wow, a Yid, a Jew who really obviously doesn't know how to daven or has no interest in daven. He just wants to read the New York Times, and yet he shows up in shul and waits all that time to make sure that everybody else has a minyan. I mean, what a level of Ahavas Israel this person must have, right? That's how the Rebbe sees it, okay? For here is a person who has wandered off to a remote part of the world and has become so far removed, not only geographically, but also mentally, as to have no concept of what prayer is or what a house of God is, yet one finds in him that Jewish spark, or as the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, expressed it in his Tanya, the divine soul, which is truly a part of God. Chelek Elokam Mimah. The divine soul seeks expression as best it can, and in the case of this particular Jew, it seeks expression in at least enabling other Jews to pray congregationally. He therefore goes out of his way to help them and at the same time to be counted with them. It's actually beautiful. It's actually, when you read these stories, I hope that it's having the same impact in you as it has in me. It helps you train, again, the lens with which you look at the world, right? And look at other human beings. And the Rebbe is absolutely right. Like when we look at it that way, it's like, oye, like, it's true. He could be reading his newspaper in the coffee shop around the corner. And yet, even though he has no clue, he has no interest, he moved away to faraway China, he has nothing to do with these businessmen to come. He didn't say China, but it says the far location. He has nothing to do with these religious businessmen who need to come here and need a minyan. He doesn't care. And yet he shows up and makes the minyan, right? The Rebbe's insight into the essential goodness of the innermost self reveals that the businessman is not an arrogant heretic, mocking God and the Jewish tradition. He is a holy Jew in exile, responding to God's call in whatever way he knows how. And that's the way he knows how. He doesn't know another way. He doesn't pray, but he knows to show up. Okay. In another incident told by Rabbi Yehoshua Moshe Stockhammer during a private audience with the Rebbe, when he raised the topic of the Rebbe's unique approach towards outreach, the Rebbe said earnestly, if a Jew wakes up in the morning on Yom Kippur and, heaven forbid, shaves, you're not allowed to shave on Yom Kippur, right? You're not allowed to put lotion, you're not allowed to put bathe, eats a full meal, obviously you're not allowed to eat, right? Gets in his car, obviously not allowed to get in a car, right? Gets in his car and drives to synagogue for services, all of which are severe violations of the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, and sits there for all of an hour or two. Those hours spent in synagogue carry great value in and of themselves. In the first instance, during that time, he has abstained from further violations of the sacred day. And furthermore, during that time, he has absorbed and internalized the sanctity of the day. And even if this doesn't have an immediate effect on him, it may well impact his descendants and future generations to come. Meaning to say, the Rebbe is giving us some very important insight. You don't really know what the impact of this is, okay? The spiritual effect of showing up, of doing a mitzvah, even if it's not in the ideal, pristine way that you might think the mitzvah is to be done, right? It's definitely not according to halacha because he's breaking Yom Kippur. But the fact that you don't know the spiritual impact, the spiritual repercussions, not only on him, but so much so that it could be to generations. So this again is an insight just from this letter of the Rebbe. Here we see the Rebbe, while emphasizing the seriousness of the transgression, exemplifying his approach to those who were uninitiated, choosing to highlight and celebrate their spiritual progress, however little, rather than focusing on and condemning them for whatever they were not doing or doing quote unquote wrong. Okay, laughing all the way to the world to come. Shimon Zigan, or Digan, I don't know, was a famous Israeli comedian, known particularly for his humorous, though somewhat satirical characterizations of traditional Judaism. In the eyes of much of the religious establishment, he was less than an ally, right? He probably mocked, like the observant and whatever, right? Surprisingly, not long after his passing, the Rebbe mentioned a story from the Talmud during a public gathering. This is the story. The Rebbe said, the Talmud relates that there were two jesters who were joyous and would bring joy to others, and therefore they were meritorious of the world to come. The Talmud doesn't tell us that they merited the world to come because of their scholarship and the like, right? It wasn't because of how many pages of Shas they knew. It wasn't because of how many books they published, how many classes they taught, how nice was their black hat, or no, how good was their prayer. The Talmud notes it was simply because they were joyous and brought joy to others. Meaning to say, the Rebbe is finding this beautiful thing about this person. That yes, you can focus on the fact that he mocked maybe the religious and the observant, right? But really, if we look deeper, wow, that person made other people laugh. That's something to be said. There's something there. That's something wonderful. To the extent that the Gemara finds that there were two people who what earned them the world to come is that they actually made people laugh. They made people joyful. In this seemingly random aside, we see the Rebbe going out of his way to evaluate someone's life and legacy in a positive light. Furthermore, in this case, it was a public figure who was known to sometimes satirize the religious world, whom the Rebbe finds such merit in, making it all the more outstanding. Whereas maybe other people would have criticized this man and find him, the Rebbe found merit in this. Notably in this story, as in many others, the Rebbe made a point of rooting his limud zchus in classic Jewish sources. So he's not coming at this from left field. He actually, again, he's rooting it, he's basing it on classic Jewish stories, saying this is Torah. This is the way that Torah wants us to approach life, right? Which is actually very important because we have to know that, yes, the Rebbe's positivity bias is rooted in Torah. Like if we look deeper, the Torah sees things in a positive light and wants us to see things in a positive light. Perhaps to demonstrate that he was not truly revolutionizing Judaism, but rather, this is so, so important, he was returning it to its original ethos. This is Judaism. This is not Chabad Judaism. This is not Rebbe Judaism. This is Judaism, right? The Rebbe is looking at everything from a Torah lens. The above story was not an isolated incident. In fact, the Rebbe took many opportunities to exhibit limud zchus in various polarizing public debates and pronouncements that often pitted him against other leaders of the Hasidic and Orthodox world. We may learn from this that the Rebbe valued this trait of limud zchus even more than his own public image, as he was willing time after time to stand up for Jews under attack at the expense of his own reputation. Okay, heroes or heretics. It was 1976. There was a full flight from Tel Aviv to Paris that was hijacked, some of you might remember, by the PLO, and it landed in Entebbe Airport in Uganda. I'm sure everybody knows the story. Over the next 7 days, there were reports of hostages, demands, negotiations, and plans that culminated in a daring 90-minute raid carried out by the IDF on July 4th, which successfully freed 102 of the 106 Jewish hostages and killed all of the terrorists. Following this week-long international roller coaster, there ensued a public uproar heard throughout the halls of the UN, as well as throughout various Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox Jewish courts and communities, as everyone wrestled with the political implications and spiritual significance of the events. More emotionally charged than the legal debates between various ambassadors and diplomats, however, were the theological critiques of certain rabbis. As most of the IDF soldiers were secular, these rabbis simply couldn't see how anything godly or miraculous could manifest through the medium of non-religious Jews. But again, do you see how the world has changed? This debate, this is not something that comes in the Jewish world leadership. It doesn't even come to their minds anymore. We don't see the world like this anymore. Like that, it's not a concern. Like we understand things on a much deeper level. But back in 1976, still this was something of concern. Like how could a miracle come through the hands of IDF soldiers who are not observant? Can you imagine? We don't even think like that, right? It's like completely like what? Completely foreign to our reality. And unfortunately, we still have, may Hashem protect all of our tzaddikim in the IDF. Okay. So into this fray, the Rebbe offered his own perspective, which was radically positive and redemptive. In a public talk on August 16 of 1976, the Rebbe applauded the courage and selflessness of the IDF, who flew thousands of miles, putting their lives in danger for the sole purpose of possibly, right? Not certain, they're putting their lives at risk, possibly saving the lives of around 100 Jews. Furthermore, he declared the Israeli soldiers to be an instrument for the deliverance of the Jewish people, even stating that a miracle had occurred through them. The Rebbe went out of his way to publicly state what others were questioning and publicly state a miracle was performed by God through them. That means they have the merit to be handpicked by God to carry out these incredible miracles. As a result, according to the Rebbe, they were undoubtedly righteous, and their portion in the world to come is guaranteed. So again, this is something that nowadays is the way everybody looks at the situation. Unfortunately, we're in a similar situation, right? And everybody looks at it this way. So for us, it's even like, what? I can't believe they thought like this only in 1976. But can you imagine? Okay. For this loving expression of limud zchus, the Rebbe was vilified. How could he publicly praise those who deviate regularly from Jewish law? Although he would respond to such attacks firmly, the Rebbe refused on principle to call out his detractors by name. This is also a lesson in and of itself, right? Even though the Rebbe stood his ground and he knew there was opposition, he expressed his viewpoint, his counter argument to their viewpoint, he never directly used the names of the people who were opposing him. Instead, he would seek to understand and explain their position. The rabbi who treated non-observant Jews with contempt, for example, was perhaps born and raised in an unloving home. Right? Perhaps that's a reality that they just are carrying. It was therefore necessary to re-educate this rabbi who was angry or quick to condemn, not to write him off as a bad leader. No matter the issue or the nature of the debate, the Rebbe seemed virtually incapable of not finding a point of goodness or a source of merit within anyone or anything. Okay, how low can you go? In perhaps one of the most radical applications of limud zchus, the following story relates how the Rebbe sought to redeem the memory of even those considered by many as the lowliest of our people. This is going to be a bit triggering because, okay, but even these people, the kapos, Jews who served as guards in concentration camps. In 1964, the Rebbe was visited by a well-known author, Harvey Swadas, for an interview. As a writer particularly interested in how ideas translate into actions and how leaders interface with the masses, Mr. Swadas was predominantly interested in the Rebbe's views on some of the thornier ethical questions that emerged from the Holocaust, including the reports of self-serving compliance and cooperation with the Germans by certain Jewish communal leaders. Ouch. So in Mr. Swadas' own words, I began by asking the Rebbe's opinion on the causes of the Holocaust that resulted in the extinction of 6 million European Jews, and of the controversy about the behavior of the German masses and the Jewish leadership, which has tormented the Western world, particularly since the appearance of Hannah Arendt's book on the Eichmann trial. His reply made no reference to abstractions, whether theological or philosophical, nor did he remark, as had another Hasidic Rebbe, on the sins of the victim, of the sins the victims must have committed to be punished so terribly by God. So he's saying his impression of asking the Rebbe, he's saying the Rebbe didn't talk about any of this, okay? Unlike other people. He pointed instead, okay, the Rebbe instead pointed to political realities and to the incredible difficulties in maintaining one's faith under a totalitarian regime, right? He switched the story to understand the context of what people are going through. The miracle, he said, was that there was any resistance, organization, or leadership at all. This was not exactly what I had expected, says the reporter, the writer. He says, I wasn't expecting this. In the Rebbe's view, the very leaders who betrayed their own people were credited with simply doing the best they could in an unthinkable situation. Incredible, no? It wasn't surprising that there was treason in the ranks. That was, in fact, understandable given the horrific circumstances. What was surprising was that anyone at all could rise above such short-sighted temptation, and it was these heroic cases that should be acknowledged and amplified. Let's not focus on the ones who couldn't resist the temptation, right, to take the other side. Let's focus on all the people who really, really stayed firm. The Rebbe continued to push the point, turning the tables and posing nuanced questions to the author about his own socially conscious work. He seemed particularly interested in On the Line, a book in which I had attempted, by means of a series of fictional portraits of auto assembly workers, to demonstrate the impact of their work on their lives. And the Rebbe asked him, okay, so what conclusions did you make in this analysis of these workers that you did on your book? Did you suggest, he persisted, that the unhappy and exploited workers chained to their machines should revolt? He's asking the author, right? The Rebbe is asking, in your book, did you suggest that these unhappy workers that are they're assembly workers, that they did you suggest that they should revolt? Said, of course not. It would have been unrealistic. The Rebbe was silent. Right? He was illustrating the fact that, so you're trying to get me to tell you about the people who didn't rise against the Germans, who sided through the Germans. That the miracle is that there were people who were able to fight the Germans. Okay. Suddenly, Harvey realized that he had been led to the very understanding that he was seeking, meaning the Rebbe is trying to show him it's unrealistic. These are unrealistic expectations, and therefore let's focus on the ones who beat the odds. Let's focus on the ones who did what is unfathomable in such circumstances. In conclusion, the Rebbe then said, you could not conscientiously recommend revolution for your unhappy workers in a free country or see it as a practical perspective for their leaders. Then how could one demand it from those who were being crushed and destroyed by the Nazis? Case closed. Compassion carries the day. Amazingly, in this story, the tables have been turned. The same Rebbe who made it his life's mission to reveal each person's highest potential manages, through profound empathy and generosity of spirit, to lighten the crushing load of judgment and indictment weighing on individuals who were subjected to the most inhumane circumstances one could imagine. In this way, the Rebbe was a master of not only recognizing the good that exists within a given person, but also having compassion for the challenges they may have experienced. In other words, no one was ever without some merit or cause for understanding, even those we normally characterize as the lowest of the low. Okay. One final example of the Rebbe's efforts to see others in the best possible light came in his response to an underhanded political maneuver. The Rebbe had founded an organization to counter attempts by Christian missionaries and fringe religious cults to recruit Jews. I'm sure you've heard of these, okay? So he did so anonymously in order to attract support from Orthodox communities outside of Chabad Lubavitch. The Rebbe's role became known, however, and one of the organization's leaders removed his name and started his own effort along the same lines, which leached support and donations from the original group. Okay, so again, this is when people say politics, okay? But unnecessarily. So the Rebbe starts this to fight something that was a common cause of everybody. And once somebody found out that the Rebbe was involved, this person took himself out because maybe they had animosity towards the Rebbe or Chabad, took himself out, started a similar organization with, again, now you're diverting the funds into two different organizations instead of everything be one thing and working together. Okay. So the original organization's manager, a non-Lubavitch Chassid, okay, because again, the Rebbe was working with other people, was appalled by the rival leader's politically motivated action and confronted him with written evidence in hand, but the rabbi in question flatly denied being involved with forming the newer organization. Frustrated and disillusioned, the original manager consulted the Rebbe and told him the story. How could this rabbi put politics before principles? He asked the Rebbe in anguish. The Rebbe responded, citing a Talmudic discussion that disqualifies a king or a high priest from serving as a judge when it comes to establishing a leap year. Again, it's like, what? Okay, look at this. The Rebbe answered with this. The king has a vested interest in whether a year has 12 or 13 months because he pays his soldiers wages by the year, which means that the treasury gains when a year has 13 months, right? Similarly, the high priest has a vested interest in this because he has to immerse in the mikvah 5 times in Yom Kippur and might be partial to a calendar that places that day in a warmer weather. So again, they're invested in the way the calendar comes out. Such is human nature. The Rebbe said that we are all prone to subconscious calculation of self-interest, whether we know it or not. Even a Jewish king or a high priest, they're going to be prone to, at the end of the day, what's more convenient for them, right? They're going to have a bias. The Rebbe then reminded the manager that the rabbi he was judging for his conduct, again, this is something that personally is hurting the Rebbe, right? That this person had been the leader of a large community and a yeshiva in Europe that had been completely wiped out during the Holocaust. Now he was trying to establish a yeshiva in New York for which he was dependent on certain donors who were ideologically opposed to Lubavitch. And this is all he has, the Rebbe said. Can you blame him for wanting to ensure the success of his important work and life legacy at all costs? So the Rebbe's thinking, you know what? He needs to succeed. He lost everything. And if the donors are going to be annoyed that he's involved in this organization that Chabad is also involved in, he's not going to be able to start his yeshiva. So this is what he has. So that's the Rebbe's looking for merit. He's looking down the Kafskos. He's looking for, the good here. Faced with the account of a rabbinic leader who was engaging in petty politics against him when he should have been modeling integrity, the Rebbe not only put a positive spin on the rabbi's tactics, he was trying to protect the remnant of his community, but acknowledged the rabbi's status by citing a Talmudic discussion relating to figures in the most honored positions, a Jewish king and the high priest. Even in a case that directly impacted him and his work for others in a negative way, so it impacted the Rebbe and his work, the Rebbe refused to make an enemy of any Jew. Even if publicly attacked and slandered, the Rebbe personally responded out of love and hope for unification. So again, the Ahavas Israel was the driving force here. Okay, so now next week we're going to talk about chapter 7, which is actually one of my favorites. Okay, I'm going to pause.